welcome back to the Prosperous Empath. Kat here. Y'all are in for a treat today, and I just wanted to share that after recording today's episode, I can still remember I stepped out of my office to go grab a glass of water, and my husband was like, "Honey, what's wrong?" Now, I'm pregnant, so he's certainly a little bit more cautious and overprotective than usual, and this may be the most intimate and vulnerable conversation I've had to date on the podcast. And it's something I've actually really come to appreciate in my podcasting journey, that through practice and continually opening my heart more and more on the show, I've been able to just touch upon a deeper level of connectedness and relating with my guests, which feels like a really beautiful practice in being an empathpreneur and being open-hearted. And today's conversation is just that. I feel deeply honored to have a dear friend and colleague, Matt Maxwell, join me on the podcast today. Matt is someone who I've had lots of relationship and shared experiences with over the years. We originally met by way of accomplishment coaching, where we both trained as coaches, but I didn't actually meet him in person until he attended one of the first transformational coaching retreats I hosted in the Dominican Republic. And then he joined me and my former business partner again in India for a coaching retreat we hosted in India. And then we did some advanced coach training together in a live program out in Colorado and California. And he's been a real support structure for me in just providing guidance on the book publishing journey. And he's just a real beautiful and wise soul. And I feel really lucky to have him on the show today. Now, I want to let you know that today's conversation could be triggering if you're dealing with grief or loss in your own life, or potentially experiencing or know someone who may be experiencing the effects of long COVID or chronic illness. So I invite you to, listen to today's intro and then decide for yourself whether or not it may be supportive for you given where you are in your own process. Today, we're really going to dig into Matt's journey with long COVID and what it looks like for him and for others, and how long COVID has been a huge catalyst for him and a major pivot in his life and business. Matt is joining me today on the show by way of a Facebook post that I saw last month, just sharing an update on some of the chronic symptoms that he was still experiencing from long COVID that I didn't really know. And I think that we all have people in our everyday lives who are experiencing long COVID or who are experiencing unseen illnesses. And I really wanted to bring some more visibility and awareness to, just to some of the experiences that people in our everyday lives are having and maybe not talking about. And this is something we really dive into on the show today, when Matt really shares that we all know people who are experiencing long COVID and just not talking about it. So I really appreciate Matt's willingness to join me today and to really dive into his journey and what it's been like for him, really how he has learned to open himself up to receive more and hold grace for himself and surrender who he was before, who he knew himself to be previously, into how COVID has really forced him to come to terms with his life now. We also dive into his amazing, beautiful book, How to Hold a Cockroach, and the lessons that the book shares on fear and the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories we tell about ourselves. We close with Matt sharing a little bit of his own guidance to help others through chronic illness, as well as how to hold their own cockroach. You are really in for a treat today, and I want to share with you a little bit about our guest before we dive in. Matt Maxwell is dedicated to freedom, joy, connection, and stewardship of the earth. Once a meat-loving Mormon mutual fund securities lawyer, he is now a spiritually curious writer, speaker, coach, and vegetarian. He is the author of How to Hold a Cockroach and leads Hearthstone Coaching, helping individuals, teams, and organizations to clarify and create what matters most to them. Matt is a graduate of the University of Hawaii and the University of Chicago Law School. In his free time, he enjoys meditating, walking in the woods, dancing like nobody's watching, and adventuring outside of his comfort zone. And those things I can certainly attest to because we have had many adventures together outside of our comfort zones. I really hope that you enjoy today's conversation. If you'd like to come connect with me and spend a little more time with my community, I invite you to join us for our next non-networking power hour, a monthly gathering for empathpreneurs to come and ask for meaningful support and receive. The next upcoming event is on Monday, June 10th. You can find the link for that, as well as for our online community to spend more time exclusively with empathpreneurs over on the show notes. Both links are in the show notes. And with that, let's dive into today's conversation. I hope that you enjoy. Hello and welcome to the Prosperous Empath Podcast, designed especially for empaths and highly sensitive entrepreneurs just like you who are committed to achieving holistic success. I'm your host, Catherine Wood, Master Certified Coach, author, mastermind leader, and founder of Unbounded Potential, a boutique coaching firm for empathic entrepreneurs. I'm on a mission to bring empathy back into the world of business. Each episode will focus on achieving more by doing less through leveraging empath-friendly leadership practices, boundaries, rituals, and systems, all the while continuing to care deeply about ourselves, others, and the world around us. If you are committed to joyful living and running a conscious business, but amassing wealth while doing so, proving that you can have both in a society that tells you you can't, then you are in the right place. Join me here each week to find out how. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review so you won't miss an episode. Plus, you'll find all the show notes and helpful resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Matt, welcome to the podcast. I feel really delighted and humbled to have you join me today.
Thanks. So glad to be here with you.
You know, we have a lot of kind of shared history in common, and we were remarking before we hit record that we're, both still processing the grief and the loss of a shared loved one, that we went on a trip together for one of our coaching retreats to the Dominican. And it feels like a really timely conversation for us to be talking on the heels of experiencing that sorrow, because we're going to be talking about living and thriving with chronic illness and your journey. And I must say, I was really floored by your journey when I saw that post, I think by your parents on Facebook. I really had no idea that you'd been experiencing long COVID. So I'm, I guess, a little sad that I didn't know that, and honored to have you share more about that journey on the show today.
Yeah, thank you.
By way of introing that conversation, it's always feels like yesterday when we last connect, and I'm just really happy to have you with me. So with that, I'd love for you to share your pronouns, and I always invite my guests to share a little bit of their story by way of getting us connected, because I think that we all perhaps learn and land through story.
Great. Yes. I'm Matt Maxwell. If you searched me, you might search Matthew Maxwell, but don't call me Matthew. Unless you mean it in like the most loving possible way. My pronouns are he, him, his. And let's see, what parts of my story would be fun to share?
There are so many, Matt.
I know. Oh my God. At my okay, here's a brief one. My 20-year high school reunion was 4 years ago, and I was at my 10-year high school reunion, and again at my 20-year high school reunion, and at my 10-year high school reunion, I would have shared myself or identified myself as a conservative Republican Mormon lawyer and married man. And then at my 20 year, I would have said I was a liberal Buddhist / spiritual vegetarian single guy. Oh, and life coach, no longer a lawyer either.
Yeah.
Every one of those things basically did a U-turn. So yeah, I've had a lot of pretty profound transformations, and I would say that in very like logistically profound transfer, like apparent, obviously big transformations in terms of my career, my marriage ending years ago, and like a little bit less obviously some of my like spiritual and paradigm transformations and it's sort of breakthroughs in how I relate to the world and myself um, and what life can be, I guess. So yeah, lots of transformation.
Wow. As you were sharing that, I'm really struck by your timeline, because I think so often moments of hardship or grief or sickness can be that incentive to change or to make massive pivots. And so many of your transformations feel like they've come from a really distinct place. I'm sure not all. um, but I think that's something I really appreciate about you, Matt, is just how so often you've been compelled by a vision or a dream. Or, you talk about the journey of Magellan a lot in your work. And I think that you're really such a change agent for Life by Design. And I so appreciate that about you. And I'm struck by kind of your timeline and where you
Mm-hmm.
find yourself now in that timeline.
Yeah. Now, um, there's sort of like there's still a sort of me that feels like the year before COVID, like 2019. I still sort of identify, and like those last couple of years before COVID, I was coaching, traveling a ton, doing a mix of one-on-one coaching and sort of larger group training and workshops and that kind of thing, working on a book and then acting, in major professional productions. So there was like this very full, rich sort of Matt life that's like, now this is what I am, Buddhist, monk, all this stuff. And then COVID, and then I got sick in March of 21. And so part of my current process of life is that many of those things that felt important and central and sort of chosen identities aren't available to me in the same way. And so the process I am in feels a little bit like slowly dying. These pieces that are just, I can't do that anymore. I'm too sick. So yeah, in terms of like now, where is my journey? I would say it feels very much in flux, and that there's not a clear endpoint. We can talk a little bit more about COVID, but a lot of that sort of, I went from this to this. That second this is now sort of unraveling in different ways. And part of the question of my life now is like, what do I continue to fight for and try to hold on to? And what do I just relinquish and let go?
I'm thinking about that timeline in 2019. You and I were together for part of that timeline together in India on another coaching retreat. And you were very much holding on to that vision of bringing your book to life during that chapter and season. And how far that book has come. And I would love to dig into the journey of really bringing that dream to life in one of the most just beautiful ways. Watching your journey with your book has been nothing but inspiring with so many of my clients, Matt, who aspire to publish books. I share your journey. I share the link for your book, your website, all of it, because I think it's such a just a beautiful idea of what's possible when you're so clear on your vision.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a little bit more about that journey, and I really know nothing about your experience and the road with long COVID. And my sense is that a lot of people don't have a direct experience with someone in their own life or their own world with long COVID. And so I'd love for you to share with us, to the degree that you're willing and able to share with us your journey.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thanks for asking. Happy to and nervous too. And I would say probably for almost anyone listening, there are people in your world with long COVID, but they don't talk about it. It's scary and very debilitating. So you might have people that you're just like, wow, I haven't heard from so and so for a while. There's a reasonable chance that the reason you haven't heard from them is that they're in bed. Something like 18 million people in the United States have long COVID.
Wow.
And probably more people have long-term impacts from a COVID infection that are just not severe enough that they're really aware of what that impact is. Long COVID could mean a lot of different things, from like complete disability to my niece just kind of like has to sleep a little bit more than she used to. And that's been the case ever since she had COVID. So there's lots of different levels of impact. But for me, I was quite careful during the first year of the pandemic. I moved to Utah, like a really spacious place outside of the city, so that I would easily avoid contact with people, and was just generally careful. And then a very close friend of mine was hospitalized in Chicago for several weeks, and I went to support her. And while I was supporting her, somehow I got infected. So I spent a few weeks really sick in bed, and I had pretty severe infection, but I wasn't hospitalized. And then my fever went away and the cough started going away, and I wasn't as sick. But I would go to check the mail and come back and have to lay down for a couple of hours because it was so exhausting. And I'm not like a professional athlete, but I probably worked out 6 times a week before I got COVID. Like, I was totally active, and I hiked a bunch of national parks the year before I got sick. So that wasn't like deconditioning. There was something clearly wrong with my body. It was not functioning right. So very immobile. I couldn't move very far without getting very tired, and I was just extremely fatigued all the time, and like foggy. Had a hard time thinking straight. So physically and mentally fatigued, and there were sort of emotional, like I'd get super irritable in ways that didn't seem like me. There were way sort of beyond Matt's normal level of irritability. And I can get irritable, but it was like, oh crap, I don't trust myself to be around people level of irritability. And it got kind of slowly better for a few months, and then it just kind of stopped getting better. And it's now been more than 3 years. I have to rest 3 or 4 times a day. I take naps. There's a lot of things just like cognitively I can't handle, so acting's totally out. I still try doing group trainings, and they're very, very hard for me. Cognitively, I just can't track a lot of what's happening when there's larger groups. One-on-one, it's not too bad. There's less signals. So luckily I can still coach. But really I'm good for like 2 or 3 hours of work a day in this condition. So it's not been completely disabling, but I live at a like much lower level of ability than I did pre-COVID.
I mean, I'm just thinking about the that stark contrast. And for those, of our listeners who are new to who you are, like, I know that you used to be an instructor for the LSAT exam. You used
Yes.
to teach the LSAT because you got, what were your, like
Yeah. I
99th
had a
percentile?
99.9th percentile score on the LSAT.
Yeah.
Yes. And I don't teach anymore. Mm. I could take the LSAT still, but it would take me days to do at the level that I used to. Yeah, thanks for drawing that contrast, physically and mentally. Like I said, like letting go of these identities. Or early in my long COVID journey, working with my coach, I had a breakthrough in stupid.
Mm.
It has led to some breakthroughs, but it's like I'd been so controlled by not wanting to do anything that seemed stupid. And I felt like I didn't really have a choice anymore. Like I was just going to say stuff and not be able to coherently process what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And most people are like, you actually sound quite normal, which is great. I'm like, okay, good. I'm glad you think I sound that way. But in my brain, it's really hard for me to track what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So I just kind of had to allow for myself that like I'm going to make some choices that feel dumb, and I'm going to like relish in that and take pride and like allow myself to be stupid, in quotes, and not let that stop me from still trying to be up to what I want to be up to in my life. So yeah, that's been one part for me of learning to live with this sort of chronic cognitive dysfunction.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm just imagining the degree, the extent of breakthrough with which it would require someone like you, right? Because I know you well. I know you to be extremely ambitious and driven and fueled by dreams and desires and authenticity and self-expression. And so I'm just imagining the degree to which you've had to surrender.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering what has supported that journey. Uh, to my ear, you seem very empowered, and I'm sure there are moments, like we all have. But you have so much, perhaps, grace around who you're being and talking about this. So how have you gotten here, Matt?
Yeah, luckily I, as had done a lot of work before I got sick in really developing a deep sense of compassion for sort of my inner child self and my adult self, and really just unconditionally loving and supporting and being with myself in what might seem very sad or angering or whatever, just being with myself, even in happiness, right? Just really having a lot of compassion. So I feel really grateful that I practiced that before getting sick, because part of the challenge of this sort of level of fatigue and dysfunction is that you can push through it sometimes. So there are some days where it's like, oh, I don't have a choice. I get sick enough where I'm like in bed and I can't get out of bed. So there's some days where I've reached a level of disability where it feels like I don't really have a choice, but most of the time I have a choice. And so that makes it hard because it's like, I constantly have to choose to rest, and I sort of have to, but I don't have to. I could push through that day and get foggier and foggier and feel worse and worse until I did break down. And in that way, it's where we're like all humans, because we always have a choice about how do we balance our well-being with what we want to be up to in life, you know? And so there are a lot of days where it's like, well, I wanted to do this and I wanted to do that and I wanted to do this and I wanted to do that. And instead I've been in bed. And I did, 1/10 of what I would have wanted to do today. And being able to hold myself in that instead of live in like the old critiques of like, come on, there must be something you're just doing wrong. Like, why don't you it's like, it's one thing to be gaslit by doctors and other people when you have a chronic illness. It's much harder when you're gaslighting yourself in a way, when your mind is like, you shouldn't be this way. And so I've learned to just have like a ton of compassion, and allow the sadness and allow the grief and the that like used to be available to me that aren't available anymore, to just like love him and just like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And I love you no matter what. So to practice that before I got sick, at least I had like a head start, in holding myself in a way that I could be with what for me is just a really difficult level of disability, dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I know a theme of at least one of your episodes, and I imagine it's come up more, is like how to receive.
That's one of my favorite episodes, Matt. I wish that our listeners were
It
seeing your
makes me
gritted
so
face.
mad. Yeah.
Tell me more.
Ooh, that's been another place for breakthrough in this sort of long-term chronic illness. Is like I've really had to come face to face with how much I want to be independent, how much sort of I wouldn't even call it self-worth. It's not that. I don't know what it is. There's something that's just like, I don't want to have to rely on anybody. And I've always kind of known that, like, oh yeah, so I resist asking for help. But this has like just put it right in front of me, how big that resistance is to being honest about how hard it is, to like really letting people see me. It's like I'll show up right after a nap. I'm like rested. I can seem kind of normal and functional for a little while, and then I disappear when I have to go rest, which is a lot of the time. We were just talking about how I've been in Nashville the last couple of years, and part of the reason I was in Nashville is it's like hardly anybody knows me there. I can just sort of hide, and not have people see me ill. And I've especially over the last year, gotten to see the limits of that way of being. And in some ways, it feels like dying, but I sort of appreciate that for most people, their dying process means ultimately returning back to our sort of child baby state of helplessness, of dependence. And so for me, with my family especially, I've had to have some like big conversations of like, I'm not being honest with y'all about how hard this is and about how much I struggle every day, just basics. And so like tearful conversations about like, I could actually really use your help, and trying to find ways that they can help me, that and allowing them, actually really allowing that. So this has also been I would say one reason right now I feel like I'm in a pretty good place is that I've surrendered more to just like being seen in this way, as less able, and asking for and receiving help from others. Oh God, but it's still very triggering. Oh, man, it's still hard for me to do.
Can I offer a reframe?
Yes, definitely.
Because I hear you on the like feeling this like return to a place of dependence, coming back from, how we started as children. But in reality, from my vantage point, it occurs like returning to a place of interdependence, right? Like, I think that as a society, we've all become conditioned to become wildly independent and feel this, over identification with the parts of ourselves that has no need for anyone else, that feels like we can do it all on our own, that we don't need support and help. And in reality, I think we do. I think so many of us are dying inside because of our over identification with our independence. And I think the path to healing is to a place of interdependence, realizing our mutual need for one another.
Yeah, and I think my prior version of what I would have called interdependence was like maybe like 90% me offering, being a friend, being there for other people, and then, receiving little bits here and there.
Yeah.
That was sort of what, and I think that's fine. I mean, that's fine. It was fine. This is just sort of a different level of like actually letting myself lean, and maybe they're leaning on me too in certain ways. right? But letting go, like trust's falling. It feels like a trust fall to me.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, okay, you guys got me.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I think with any, I, of course, just grown so much in my compassion for people with all kinds of chronic conditions, especially, I mean, anything that's chronic, basically, we don't know how to treat yet. And that's why it's still chronic. So there's always the uncertainty. Will research figure this out? Will any kind of new treatment, are there things that I could do that might alleviate this condition or heal it or cure it or just even make it a little bit better, right? There's always dealing with that sort of uncertainty. And I've just grown so much in my compassion for all kinds of chronic conditions. Like I said, like letting go of some identities. Well, who I am is that I can blank, and that's not available anymore. So letting that go, but also seeing, but what I can still do is be with people compassionately. If anybody's like, gosh, I just wish I had a nap buddy, I would be very good at offering like nap buddyship to that person. I can sit with someone even when I'm sort of cognitively confused. So things that I used to value about myself that aren't available, sort of like, honoring that goodbye, but also being present with the ways I can still contribute, and still be of support to other people, because that just feels good to me. I want to be in a space of contribution. And so there is that allowing more of someone else's support and help, I guess, but also still honoring the ways in which I can be a service and companionship and partnership to other people. Yeah, that's part of the journey too.
I hear a lot in your words about perhaps redefining your identities and who you are and how you perhaps think of yourself. And I guess I'm curious about how you have come to redefine thriving or your own definition of success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's sort of there's a few layers of that question, on a more like practical, objectively measurable prosperity basis, just like bottom line. I'm playing a different kind of game, and I am excited by it, even though it feels like I'm sort of forced into it. Because I'm like, if I could win this game and I do get better, my life's going to be really awesome. But that game is basically like, how do I make a comfortable living that cares for all of my needs with like 2 hours a day of like present and cognitive ability. So I'm still playing that and still experimenting. And I wouldn't say I'm exactly winning it, but it's a fun game to play. I can still have fun with it, even though I'm like, crap, I wish I could work a full day. In fact, it's so bad that I had last year 4 nights in a row where I dreamed I was back in a law firm, like back practicing law. And Kat knows this, but that I worked in a big law firm practicing mutual fund securities law for years. That was my prior role in life. And usually I think about that as not a fun place to be. With like quite a fair amount of repulsion. But in my current state, I woke up from these dreams that I was back practicing law, and I cried because I wish to be able to work full time again so much. It's really hard to not be able to work as much as I want to, but it is fun to play. How could I make my life work financially on 2 hours a day? And so there's like, of course, like an orientation towards passive income and like what kinds of things could in the long run create more passive income, and how do I balance that out with making money now to make sure my needs are still met? And there's just sort of a much tighter focus. There has to be a much tighter focus for me to make my life work. Mm-hmm. Along with what things can I be up to that still feel nourishing. It's a lot harder for an activity to be nourishing for me. So there's much more focus on, and all of these obviously are games that someone who's fully well, we might say, could be playing too, right? It's just like life's forced me into like intentionality. It's like, okay, I have about this much time each day where I can but what are the things I can do that are nourishing me, that like deplete as little energy as possible, and that also can provide for my needs and that make a difference? Because I'm still committed to that both and of like, a comfortable life that meets all of my needs, and also that's one of service and giving and making a difference for other people. It's just, I have to play that much more intentionally with a smaller window of opportunity.
Totally. Well, I mean, I think that that's a beautiful segue to your book, because I'm really hearing a lot of overlap. I know how important freedom is to you. I know how much of a role that played in your vision for the book. um, and and I'm also curious how the messages from your book maybe supporting you now and supporting you in multiple ways, right? From a financial perspective, sure, but also from a place of compassion and surrender. And for our audience who haven't already read your amazing book, we'll link to it in the show notes. But the title of Matt's amazing book is How to Hold a Cockroach. So
Yes.
maybe you'll share a little bit more about some of the overlaps that you see.
Yes, I'd love to. Yes, and I'm smiling because I really love my book. I love it so much. I feel so delighted that it's in the world,
And
and
in how many countries?
like 80 something.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Amazing. It's
It's been
really in the
it's been sold.
world.
It's been sold in that many countries, and it's translated now into two. It was, of course, written in English, and it's now been translated into two other languages, and three more are on the way.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Bravo.
it's really amazing. Really amazing. Um, so, yes, it's called How to Hold a Cockroach, and the subtitle is A Book for Those Who Are Free and Don't Know It. And let's see, what's the quickest summary I could give? It's a story. So it's sort of like a personal development or philosophical book, but it's presented in the form of a story about a boy who runs into a cockroach and gets real freaked out and upset and angry because cockroaches are so awful and disgusting. And he sits with the cockroach long enough that he starts to remember why he hates them, what happened when he was little, and what he started to believe. And he starts to get a little bit of space from how gross they are. And then eventually kind of goes, wait, I don't really know what a cockroach is. It's just been a story that it's gross and disgusting that I've always believed because that's what I was told. But maybe I don't really know what a cockroach is. And then the story goes from that to him, right, to ourselves. So, of course, I don't really care what people think about cockroaches. And most of us, unless you're surrounded by them all the time, I think it's fine if you want to keep hating them. No pressure here. This is not a should. This book is not about shoulds. It's not about how we should see things. It's about getting curious because at least some of our beliefs might really be limiting our freedom, might be limiting how we get to experience ourselves, or how we experience our relationships with others, or just how we are in relationship with life. And so the book's an invitation to curiosity and to just allow ourselves to look at those beliefs with a little bit of a curiosity and a questioning and an openness to maybe that's not how it is. It's just how I believed it was. And from that spaciousness, starting to then have more choice about how we see ourselves and how we see the world, and not just how we see them, but I call it How to Hold a Cockroach, because it's also sort of not just my belief about something or my paradigm, but it's also then how I treat it, how I hold it, how I'm in relationship with that thing. Yeah, I think that was a good summary. Am I missing anything?
You're not missing anything about the book, but I'm listening between the lines and I'm just hearing so much of the overlap about how that message from your book has been your journey through long COVID.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's wild because it was my journey, well before. there's always like layers of story and how we see ourselves and how we think we ought to be and what makes us worthwhile or good, and then we become trapped by that. That's how I have to be. And in some ways, I personally don't want to get into the story of like, I'm glad that I had long COVID or that I have it. And if people choose that, like they can. But I don't think people should feel like they ought to choose like, good thing I had this illness. That doesn't make you don't have to do that. Basically, if people want to be like, no, F this, I don't want to be sick, I feel like that's totally fine with me. So this is not, everything is a gift. But here I am with a condition that I don't know how to alter that impacts my life every single day. And yes, I probably would not choose that. And I'm doing a lot. I continue to do a lot to see how I could possibly heal, including meeting with Senate staffers to try to get research funded. Like on every level I'm playing, how could I get better? And here I am. And so from here I am, how do I hold this? How do I hold him? How do I hold that? Like, this is my daily experience that I'm constantly having to be in bed. And I don't think that there's any should here. There's no way that someone should hold that. But when how do I hold it for me? It's just like, I love you so much. And I'm really sorry you're going through this. And let's see what we can do to try to still make it the best life we can for you. And that is like the cockroach holding of this experience. Yeah. And that includes holding him when he's really upset and angry and pissed that this is what life is now.
Yeah.
It's holding that too. Oh, yeah. I'm right here with you. Even when you see it darkly.
I really hear that. Like, I hear just how much holding the cockroach is about holding all the facets of your experience, not bypassing, not rejecting, not judging, not shoulding, not oughting yourself, but truly allowing all of it without making it wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And then from there, from holding him in with all of it, right? Hey, if you'd like to, remember that you still get to enjoy ice cream. You could remember that. Right. So there is sort of and in what ways can I support you in experiencing yourself and life still in ways that leave you free and able to enjoy what you can enjoy, but not a forcing of that, not a demand for that, not a, when it's dark, and I'll be right there with you in the darkness. And if you'd like to look at the light, we could look there too, if you want, but I'll be with you no matter where you go.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Really, I hear the invitation. So I really want to wrap on this idea of holding, because there's a lot of themes here, right? Like you're talking about holding your own cockroaches, and we've talked a lot about you letting other people hold you. And I imagine there's many listeners who either personally are experiencing an illness or know someone who is, and they are, wanting guidance on how do they hold their own cockroaches, and how do we help others hold theirs? And even more tactically speaking, Matt, for you, like, how do we help others like you who are experiencing long COVID, and how can we support?
Yeah. I mean, there's some like big picture, like there's movements happening to demand funding. Like the biggest thing right now is like there is research that's figuring out what is actually happening physiologically, but the pace of it is really slow, and clinical trials are really slow. So we're still years away from like an FDA approved treatment, maybe decades at the rate we're going. So just practically big picture, if you're someone with power, talk to your people. Like we need people in Congress and in the Senate, especially, to really back long COVID research. That's like big picture, the thing that needs to happen. And to make sure there's dedicated annual funding to treatment to research and treatment. So that's kind of like a big picture, like thing that I'm up to. On a more personal level, honestly, just like letting people know you care, willing to be with them, willingness to be with others. A lot of people, I think, give advice on how to get better from things that don't really know how to get better. They just don't know how to be with someone who's not well. And they use that advice as a way to avoid their discomfort. And I don't blame them for that. That's not a critique. It's just what people do. And we need to know that people will also just be with us, you know? So whether that's being with ourselves in our own illness and our own condition with compassion and love, or being with others in the space they're in without judgment, without needing to fix or change.
And particularly, I think something that it's been really hard for me to ask for. And this definitely applies to people with long COVID, or a related illness called MECFS, which a lot of people with long COVID basically have, is that, we don't have a lot of energy, but we want to be with people. And it's taken me a while to learn. I'm still learning this, to just say like, hey, I'd really like company. Will you hang out with me while I lay down on a park bench? It's like I'm used to my modes of social engagement, and some of those are really draining. And so, I guess offering people company in ways we might not normally do company, which might include literally just kind of sitting next to someone while they're lying in bed, could be an amazing gift to someone, to have that sort of connection and sense of belonging and support when they can't give what they would normally give socially. That's a really precious offering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm also hearing the both and of that with getting curious with those we love who have chronic illness. What does companionship look like in a redefined nature?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's such a great, and like I would say, even that takes a certain sort of boldness and care to just ask, in the space of an unknown response. So yes, exactly. And honestly, also, you can't go wrong. There was a friend who heard I had gotten reinfected and was sick, and another level of sick than my normal. And she just brought like a care package with a few little things in it and left it at my door, and knew I was kind of too fatigued to interact. And that's like something I don't know. I'm not very good at helping people. I'm sort of I don't have any judgment when I felt like, man, no one's here supporting me, because like that's what I would do. So I don't feel any judgment, but just like really, really, you can't go wrong if you're coming from love.
Matt, when's your next book coming out? When can people hear and learn more from you?
We'll see. The limit to my next book. Well, long COVID's limited my writing for sure. But I have some books in my heart. There's 4 or 5 that are in process. So let's see. How about I make a declaration? Would that be a good thing to do, Coach? My next book.
If you're willing to make a game of it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. No, I mean, listen, it's a separate topic is how I finally finished my book. And, that's a separate topic and what I did to make it successful. But I think I declared that my book would be published by X date at least 7 times.
Here. We all have a version of that story.
And if you can do and every time it gave me power, it gave me sort of an urgency, it gave me a game to play, it gave me a structure to be engaged with, and then it got blown out of the water by my self-sabotages and whatever else. And it didn't matter because I was in process. I was in progress. So yes, don't be afraid of just declaring it and playing for it. My next book will be out by November 12th.
Of this year?
Yeah. That'd be a great game to play. Yeah.
Cheers to that. For our listeners who haven't yet picked up a copy of your book or the audiobook or the course, I will include the show notes to all of that. We'll include the link in the show notes, but I think I need to let our listeners know that your book is stunning, and it has hand-drawn images throughout, which I don't think you mentioned. And the audiobook is voiceovered by who, Matt? It's someone
Simon Vance.
Simon Vance,
who is a legend in the audiobook industry. I mean, that is the most perfect voice for this book in the whole world.
Yeah. So with that, I'll invite you to close us on this beautiful conversation with the question I ask all my guests, which is, what has supported you in becoming the prosperous empath you are?
I would say trust. The book is, for me, really a vulnerable sort of book. It's a story, but it's pretty obviously about me and about the reader. It's a vulnerable sort of book, and quite tender, and felt terrifying to write, especially for the mutual fund securities lawyer that worked in big law. So one thing I would say is, like, if your heart is calling you to something and you know in your heart that you're called to it, just trust it and take steps. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, have it be okay to experiment and fail. Lean in this direction, that's not working. You want to lean far enough to know it really doesn't work. But I would say a willingness to just, okay, and then, oh, this seems to actually be working. Let me now go further in that direction of what's working. So willingness to experiment. With marketing, with whatever you're up to, there's going to be unknowns, and to just be with the unknown and take action, and then lean into what's working, and to see if you can even enjoy I talked about my breakthrough in stupid. You might just need to bring a little stupid into that. That's what it takes to experiment and fail. And then every once in a while, if you experiment enough, you succeed.
I feel like really key in that is connecting with this little shimmer and glimmer I see in your eyes, because I think so much of our willingness to trust and fail and adventure has to do with finding the light in the journey.
Yes. Okay, can I give an example?
By all means.
Okay, because last week I was in New York. I'm in this very, very long road trip from Asheville back to Denver, where I'm going to be living with my parents because I need help. And on this very long road trip, I've just been slowly going around, and I stopped in New York for a thing. And I set up a book signing little stand for my book in the middle of Times Square. With a big poster, how to hold a cockroach, book signing, get your book here. Sat there with a big pile of books in the middle of Times Square with all the people and all the craziness and all the whatever. And it was so stupid. I think in 3.5 hours, I sold 4 books. So that was an example of an experiment that quote failed, right? That was not apparently the way to sell a lot of copies of my book. But the only way to know that was to sit there in Times Square and set up a book signing stand. And so being okay with know what the hell, I'm just going to go for this crazy idea and just see. And if you can be in the enjoyment of it, then it frees you to try stuff. Because what I also tried was Amazon ads, and that seemed like a crazy and sort of stupid thing to do. And I've sold thousands and thousands of copies of my book because I tried Amazon ads. So you just don't know. You've got to just experiment and try things.
Well, cheers to that. Matt, I'm humbled. I'm humbled by our conversation, by your wisdom, by your grace, and by how much love I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It was really a complete honor to have you. Thank you. Yeah, I want to say to any of sort of my people who are listening, who might find this episode through me, that I've been listening to other episodes of your podcast. And if Kat's graciousness and presence and wisdom at all resonate with you during this episode, then I hope you'll listen to other episodes. There's so much wisdom and compassion and fun in your episodes. So I thank you for creating this. And of course, thank you for
the deep and lasting impact you've had on my life. I'm so grateful for you.
Thanks, Matt. So much love.
I look at it like it's like this sort of dual mindset that are sort of opposing. It's like a sort of a paradox, but it's like, maybe I'm getting better right now. And maybe there's something I could do today to be the cause of getting better. So that's sort of like an at cause, right? Like I never know what might make a difference. And so there's lots of things on my list. And what I'm going to do is diligently experiment, because I might be getting better right now. I don't want to be in a story that I'm always going to be sick, and that's just what life is now. So that's like one place to come from. And another place to come from is, this might be my life. And it might be that I don't get better. And so if that's the case, how do I make it so that this is not something that I have to get through in order to be okay? And so how do I hold myself? How do I hold this experience in a way that I can still have a life that feels worth living? If this happens to be the rest of my life. So there's sort of like, hey, this might be over today, and this might be it. And so I don't want to be coming from, I have to get through this in order to enjoy my life.
Yeah. For our listeners, we're connecting after we got off the record, and then we realized we needed to share this because we've both been so deeply touched by this conversation. And I just hear how much reminder we always have to be empowered by our own circumstances in life, that we do not have to suffer or get through, that we can create an empowering interpretation for ourselves.
Yeah. Yes. And at the same time, hold with compassion.
Yeah.
Whatever parts of us are still suffering.
Yes, it gets to suck, people.
Yeah,
it is okay
exactly.
that it is awful. This is awful. This never should have happened to Matt.
Yeah. Yeah. And here we are. Thank you. Appreciate you so much.
Thank you so much for listening today to this episode of the Prosperous Empath Podcast with me, Catherine Wood. Make sure you subscribe and leave a review so you don't miss an episode, and so more empaths just like you and me can find the show. As a thank you, each month, one lucky reviewer will receive a 60-minute coaching session with a member of our Unbounded Potential team. You can find all the show notes and bonus resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Thank you so much for listening and locking arms with me to bring empathy and prosperity back into the world of business.